Have you ever wondered what you would do if you discovered that the darkest secrets of your town involved people you know and love? In a place as peaceful as the streets of Willow Creek, young journalist Jake Thompson never imagined that his search for a compelling story would uncover terrifying mysteries and unimaginable family connections. When an old, seemingly harmless radio begins broadcasting sinister secrets from the past, Jake faces a dangerous choice. Continue investigating and unearth truths that could change everything, or let the past remain buried. If you've ever found yourself thinking about the hidden stories beneath the surface of seemingly normal things, or if you've ever wondered how far you'd go for answers no one else dares to seek, then this video is for you. Jake will confront mysterious forces, family secrets, and a sinister cult that might be closer than he ever imagined. Are you ready to find out how this journey could not only reveal Willow Creek's past, but also transform the town's future?
Behind the doors.
The small town of Willow Creek, with its quiet streets and wooden houses, seemed like a place lost in time. The morning sun illuminated the details of the facades, while the leaves of the trees danced in the gentle breeze. Jake Thompson, a 28-year-old journalist, walked through the tree-lined streets, observing the town's calm atmosphere. He was looking for a new story for the local newspaper, something that could bring some life to the dusty pages of the Willow Creek Gazette. As he entered Mrs. Henderson's antique shop, a scent of aged wood and dust filled his nose. The place was filled with curious objects, clocks frozen in time, worn-out furniture, and a multitude of small items, each carrying stories in every scratch. Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with white hair and eyes that seemed to know every corner of the town, greeted him with a warm smile. "Jake, dear, what brings you here today?" she asked, while polishing an object with a cloth. "I'm looking for something interesting for a story, Mrs. Henderson." "Any suggestions?" Jake replied, glancing around. "Oh, you know I always have something tucked away here. Just a moment." The lady stepped away, diving into a dusty shelf. After a few minutes of searching, she returned with an old radio, its exterior covered in a layer of dust. "Look at this, a radio from the 1950s. It may not seem like much, but I've heard stories that it brings." Jake took the radio in his hands, admiring its vintage design. There was something intriguing about the device, as if it held secrets from a forgotten era. "Can I try turning it on?" he asked. "Of course, dear. But be careful, these old devices can be temperamental," Mrs. Henderson warned with a smile. With a gentle touch, Jake turned the dial, and to his surprise, the radio began to hiss before stabilizing. A hoarse and mysterious voice started to echo through the shop, immediately capturing his attention. "The history of Willow Creek is stained with blood and secrets. Those who dare to dig into the past may uncover things they aren't ready to know." Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He looked at Mrs. Henderson, who seemed frozen in place, her eyes wide with surprise. "Are you hearing this?" he asked, trying to comprehend what was happening. Yes, I am," she murmured, a look of fear settling on her face. "This isn't normal, Jake. It shouldn't be like this." The voice continued, narrating grim events that occurred in Willow Creek decades ago, mentioning mysterious disappearances and a fire that devastated part of the town. Jake's heart raced. The story seemed so real, so tangible. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was somehow connected to it all. "I need to know more," Jake said, determined. "This is a story I can't ignore." "Jake, be careful," Mrs. Henderson warned, the concern evident in her voice. "This story could have dangerous consequences. Some things are better left in the past." But Jake was already consumed by the curiosity burning inside him. After turning off the radio, he looked around the shop, sensing a strange presence, as if something or someone was watching his every move. The air felt heavier, and a sense of not being alone enveloped him. "Mrs. Henderson, have you ever heard of these events before?" he asked, trying to gather more information. She sighed, a shadow of sadness crossing her face. "Yes, but they're stories many prefer to forget. Some truths are too painful to face." Jake nodded, his journalistic instincts igniting a flame of determination. He knew he needed to dig deeper, even with the feeling that sinister forces might be at play. What he had discovered in that antique shop could be just the beginning of a journey that would change not only his life, but also the history of Willow Creek forever. Jake Thompson walked through the streets of Willow Creek, feeling the weight of curiosity in his chest. The cool morning breeze brushed against his face, but his mind was absorbed in thoughts about the mysterious radio he had found. The strange transmissions he had heard still echoed in his head, like a call to unearth truths buried in the shadows of the town. He decided that the best way forward was to talk to the older residents, those who carried the stories and secrets of a past many preferred to forget. As he entered the local cafe, a place where smiles were as frequent as the aroma of fresh coffee, Jake spotted Mr. Henderson, one of the town's oldest residents. The man was sitting at a table near the window with a steaming cup in front of him. Jake approached, his heart beating faster. "Good morning, Mr. Henderson. Mind if I join you?" Jake asked, trying to hide the anxiety in his voice. "Of course, young man. What brings you here? News for the paper?" The old man replied, with a smile that revealed yellowed but still welcoming teeth. "Actually, I'm investigating some things about Willow Creek's past. I've heard some stories about disappearances and a fire that happened many years ago. Could you tell me what you know?" Mr. Henderson's expression became serious, and he set his coffee aside. "Ah, young man, that's a delicate subject. Many people prefer not to talk about it. The fire, well, it was a tragedy. Many lives were lost, and the disappearances, well, they say some were never found." "What exactly happened?" Jake insisted, feeling adrenaline surge through his veins. "It was a summer night, and the fire spread quickly. They say it was caused by a cult operating in the town. They were doing strange rituals, and when the fire started, many tried to escape, but..." He hesitated, looking around as if he feared someone was listening. "But many didn't make it." Jake frowned. What Mr. Henderson was saying aligned with the transmissions he had heard on the radio. "And the disappearances? What do you know about them?" Jake asked, his curiosity growing. "The story goes that some people were taken. No one knew where they went, and those who tried to follow the clues. Many ended up in trouble. Better leave it alone, son. The past is a dangerous place." Jake felt a chill down his spine. He knew that if he wanted to uncover the truth, he would have to dig deeper. He thanked Mr. Henderson and decided to visit the local library. Upon arrival, he was greeted by the librarian, an elderly woman with gray hair and a keen eye. "What are you looking for, Jake?" she asked while organizing some books. "I'm after information about the old disappearances and the fire. Do you have any material that could help?" She led him to a dusty section where old books and yellowed newspapers were stacked. Jake began to leaf through the pages, absorbing every word. It was then that his eyes landed on a dusty diary hidden among the volumes. "What's this?" he murmured to himself, pulling the diary closer. The cover was worn, but upon opening it, Jake found the handwriting of a young man describing strange events and people who disappeared. As he read, his heart raced. The author mentioned his own family, making connections Jake could never have imagined. "It can't be," he whispered, the reality of what he was discovering beginning to form in his mind. Suddenly, the radio he had left at home began to hiss, the familiar voice cutting through the silence of the library. It was as if it was calling out to him. "The truth is a burden, and there are those who will do anything to keep it hidden," the voice whispered, and Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He abruptly closed the diary, his heart pounding. What was happening? The feeling of being watched returned with full force. The radio, with its enigmatic voice, seemed to be the thread connecting him to the secrets the town had hidden for so long. "Jake," the librarian called, interrupting his thoughts. "Are you all right?" Yes, I'm just trying to make sense of all this," he replied, trying to mask the fear he felt. "Be careful what you're looking for, young man. Some truths aren't meant to be uncovered," she said with a grave look. Jake nodded, but in his heart his determination only grew. He knew he needed to uncover the truth, no matter the risks involved. The town of Willow Creek harbored dark secrets, and he was determined to unravel them. Jake Thompson felt his heart racing as he walked down the deserted street of Willow Creek. The moonlight filtered through the treetops, casting dancing shadows around him. He couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, an invisible presence following his every step. Since finding the radio in Mrs. Henderson's antique shop and hearing the mysterious voice, his life had changed. Now he was immersed in a mystery that not only involved the town, but also his own family. That morning, Jake received an anonymous envelope, and its contents made his blood run cold. The message was clear: stop investigating, or you'll pay for your questions. He gripped the paper tightly, anger and fear mixing within him. "Who dares to threaten me?" he murmured to himself. The curiosity and desire to uncover the truth about the fire and the cult operating in Willow Creek were stronger than any fear he might feel. He decided to visit the local cafe, where he could talk to some older residents who might have valuable information. As soon as he entered, the aroma of fresh coffee and the soft chatter of customers surrounded him. He spotted Mr. Jenkins, one of the town's oldest residents, sitting at a nearby table. Jake approached, trying to appear casual. "Hi, Mr. Jenkins. Mind if I join you?" Jake asked, pulling out a chair. "Of course, young man. What brings you here? It's not every day a young journalist shows up around here," the old man replied with a curious smile. Jake hesitated for a moment, then decided to go ahead. "I'm investigating some old stories about Willow Creek. I've heard about a fire and some disappearances. Could you tell me what you know?" Mr. Jenkins' smile faded, and he looked around as if wanting to make sure no one was listening. "Ah, son, you have to be careful with these things. Willow Creek's past isn't something most people want to remember. But it's important, Mr. Jenkins. People deserve to know the truth," Jake insisted, his piercing gaze fixed on the man's face. The old man sighed, his expression turning somber. The fire was a tragedy, and many believe it was caused by a cult. They gathered in the shadows, doing things no one should know about. And the disappearances? Well, some things are better left buried. "Why doesn't anyone talk about it?" Jake asked, feeling growing frustration. "Fear, young man. Fear of what might happen if the truth comes out. Some people are still around, and they don't like being disturbed," Mr. Jenkins replied, glancing at the door, as if expecting someone to walk in. Jake felt a shiver down his spine. "Do you think they'll know I'm investigating? I shouldn't be saying this, but stay safe. If you continue, you might find answers. But be prepared for what you might discover," the man said, his voice low and grave. The conversation left him unsettled, but at the same time, his determination grew. As he left the cafe, he noticed a hooded figure in the distance, watching him. The figure quickly moved away, and Jake decided to ignore it. He was tired of being intimidated by shadows. That night, as he walked back home, the feeling of being followed intensified. The wind blew cold, and the trees seemed to whisper dark secrets. Suddenly, a man appeared in front of him. He was tall, with a menacing look and a deep voice that resonated in the darkness. "Jake Thompson," the man said in a tone that made it clear he wasn't there for games. "You need to stop this investigation. Don't get involved in things you don't understand." Jake swallowed hard, adrenaline coursing through his veins. "And who are you to tell me what to do? The truth needs to be revealed." "You don't know who you're dealing with," the man insisted, stepping closer. "Some secrets should stay buried. It's better for you and your family." The young man felt a chill. "My father, my family has a right to know the truth. You can't stop me." With a quick movement, Jake turned and began to run, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't look back, but the man's voice echoed in his mind, a dark warning that followed him. He knew he was delving into something much bigger than he had imagined, and the shadows of Willow Creek were more alive than ever. Jake Thompson looked at his friends gathered in his living room, the dim light from the overhead lamp casting dancing shadows on the walls. The atmosphere was heavy, a mix of excitement and apprehension. Sarah, his childhood friend with a peculiar interest in the occult, was at the forefront, watching each of them with a blend of seriousness and enthusiasm. "So, are we all in agreement?" Jake asked, his voice resonating in the tense silence. "I think we need to do this. If there's any truth to be found, maybe we can find it here." "I don't know, Jake, this seems dangerous," said Mark, one of the more cautious friends in the group. He rolled his eyes, clearly uncomfortable with the idea of a seance. "What if something goes wrong?" We need to take the risk, Sarah insisted, her gaze fixed on the old radio Jake had brought. This radio has already shown us that there's something dark in Willow Creek. And if we can communicate with those who have passed, maybe they can help us understand. Jake nodded, trying to convey some confidence. He knew the voices coming from the radio were more than just static. The feeling of presence that had accompanied him since he started his investigation seemed stronger when he was near that device. Let's just try. If it doesn't work, we can stop. But if there's a chance to discover something, we can't let it pass. Reluctantly, Mark agreed, and the group began to prepare. They placed some candles around the table, creating an atmosphere conducive to the seance. The room was filled with an air of expectation, and as the flickering flames illuminated the friends' faces, Jake felt a chill down his spine. "Everyone ready?" Sarah asked, looking at each of them. When everyone nodded, she began to speak. "Spirits that inhabit this place, if there is anyone who wishes to communicate with us, we are here to listen." Jake held the radio in his hands, his heart racing. The voice he had heard before seemed distant, but now, with friends by his side, the anticipation enveloped him like a cloak. The tension in the room was palpable. Every creak of the wooden house seemed amplified, every whisper echoing like a call. "Please reveal yourself," Jake said, his voice firm. "We need to know the truth about what happened here in Willow Creek, about the cult, about the disappearances." He turned the dial on the radio, and the static increased, filling the space with an unsettling hum. Then, as if obeying a command, the voice he both feared and longed to hear emerged from the radio waves. "You shouldn't be here." The group froze, eyes wide with surprise and fear. "Who are you?" Jake asked, trying to remain calm. "Why shouldn't we be here?" "Those who came before you, they didn't return," the voice replied, grave and echoing. "And the cult is still active. They don't want you to uncover the truth." A shiver ran down Jake's spine. "What do you mean by they? Who are the members of the cult?" The voice hesitated, and the silence in the room became deafening. "Be careful. You've become a target." The words sounded like a warning, and the atmosphere grew heavy as if a storm was about to break over them. Mark, visibly agitated, asked, "We need to stop. This is crazy." "No!" Jake exclaimed, his determination growing. "We need to know more. Who's after us? What do they want?" "Buried secrets shouldn't be revealed," the voice whispered, almost like a lament. "The truth can be deadly." Sarah, with her eyes fixed on the radio, said, "Please, if there's anything we can do, we want to help. If you know something, tell us." "Be careful who you trust," the voice insisted, and the radio began to hiss, as if it was about to lose the signal. "The cult is still watching." Before they could ask more questions, the static increased, and the transmission abruptly cut off. The group sat in silence, digesting what had just happened. The atmosphere was tense, and Jake felt a crushing weight on his chest. "That was intense," Mark murmured, his eyes still fixed on the radio. "But now what? What do we do with this?" Jake took a deep breath, his mind spinning with the implications of the message. "We need to find out who's behind this. If the cult is still active, they must be nearby, and we need to protect ourselves." Sarah looked at Jake, determination shining in her eyes. "Let's investigate more. We need to understand what's happening. We're in this together, right?" "Right," Jake replied, feeling a new surge of courage. "We're not stopping now. The truth has to come out no matter the cost." The atmosphere in Willow Creek was thick with tension and uncertainty. Night had fallen abruptly, and the darkness seemed to spread quickly, as if the town was being consumed by a blanket of shadows. Among the group of friends who had joined Jake, the unease was palpable. Sarah, with her restless eyes, couldn't hide her concern. "Do you really think the cult is behind Mark's disappearance?" Sarah asked, breaking the tense silence that hung over them. Jake shook his head, trying to process the idea. Mark's disappearance wasn't just alarming. It was a sign that the forces they were trying to uncover were closer than they ever imagined. "I don't know, but I can't ignore the possibility. We need to act fast." The determination in Jake's voice was evident. He remembered how Mark, before disappearing, had mentioned seeing a strange light near the old factory. "Let's go to the factory. He might have gotten into trouble there." The group gathered, adrenaline pumping through their veins as they headed towards that forgotten part of town. The factory, now abandoned, had a sinister appearance under the moonlight. The cold wind whispered through the ruins, creating a perfect setting for any horror story. "Are you sure we want to do this?" Lucas, one of the more skeptical friends in the group, asked as he looked at the broken windows. "What if the cult is there?" "We need to find Mark," Jake insisted, his worry drowning out any fear he might feel. He couldn't let anyone else disappear. As they approached the entrance, a sense of déjà vu washed over Jake. It was as if the factory itself was alive, as if it was guarding ancient secrets. However, determination pushed him forward. As soon as they crossed the threshold, the air felt denser and heavier. Inside the factory, a sepulchral silence enveloped them. The group began to explore, their flashlights illuminating the worn walls and the remnants of rusted machinery. The echo of their footsteps resounded, and every noise seemed amplified, as if the factory itself was watching. "Look!" Sarah exclaimed, pointing to a dark corner of the room. There was a slightly ajar door, a passage that seemed to lead them into the unknown. Adrenaline coursed through Jake's veins. His heart beat faster, and he knew something was about to be revealed. "Let's go," he said, gesturing for the group to follow him. As they passed through the door, the environment changed. The space was smaller and filled with strange artifacts, candles, symbols drawn on the walls, and yellowed records that seemed to tell a macabre story. The air was filled with a sweet, almost decaying scent. "This is a hideout," Lucas murmured, his voice trembling. "This is where they held their rituals." Jake began examining the records, his hands trembling slightly as he touched the aged pages. What he read made his heart race. The words revealed details about the cult, its practices, and in a moment of total disbelief, his own mother's name appeared in one of the notes. "No, it can't be," Jake whispered in shock. She was involved?" Sarah approached, concerned about the expression on Jake's face. "What is it? What did you find?" "My mother. She was here," he stammered, his hands clenching into fists as his mind struggled to accept the truth. "What does this mean for me? For our family?" The friends exchanged worried looks, not knowing how to console Jake. The weight of the revelation was unbearable. He felt torn between the love for his mother and the betrayal he felt for her being part of something so dark. "We need to get out of here," Sarah said, her voice now a whisper. "The cult might find out we're here." Jake nodded, but the reality of what he had discovered kept him rooted. He turned to the records again, determined to understand more. However, a sense of foreboding hit him when he heard a noise coming from the entrance. The group froze, their eyes wide. "What was that?" Lucas asked, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," Jake replied, his heart sinking. They weren't alone. The cult was out there, and now the fight for the truth had become a race against time. Jake was sitting at the kitchen table in his house, his heart racing as he waited for his mother's arrival. The atmosphere in the house was heavy, and he could feel the tension in the air. The revelation about his mother being involved in the cult tormented him, and now, with the radio's voice echoing in his mind, he knew he needed to confront her. When the door opened, his mother, Clara, walked in with a mix of worry and sadness on her face. "Jake, you called me?" she asked, slowly entering and closing the door behind her. The weight of what was about to be discussed hung between them. "Mom, we need to talk. About the cult. About you," Jake replied, his voice firm but filled with emotion. He didn't want to seem aggressive, but the truth needed to come out. Clara sighed, her eyes welling up with tears. "I knew this day would come. I tried to protect you, son. I didn't want you to get involved in this." "Protect? You were involved. How could you?" Jake exclaimed, standing up from the chair and beginning to pace. "You knew what was happening, but you decided to stay silent." "Jake, listen to me," Clara insisted, her voice trembling. I distanced myself from that group because I realized how dangerous they were. What I did was to save you and your sister. Many of the members are still around, and they won't hesitate to attack anyone who tries to expose the truth. The revelation weighed on Jake like a ton of bricks. He had always admired his mother's strength, but now he felt the trust he had in her was disintegrating. But why didn't you tell me? I'm part of this too. I deserve to know the truth. Clara hesitated, her expression turning somber. Because the truth can be devastating, Jake. You may not be prepared for what you'll discover. The leader of the cult, he's someone very close to you. These words echoed in Jake's mind, like a distant echo that grew closer. Who? Who is it? He demanded, his heart racing. It's your Uncle David. He's been manipulating the town for decades, controlling people, making them believe everything was fine. He's the real leader, Clara said, her gaze fixed on Jake, seeking some understanding. The revelation hit Jake like a punch in the stomach. David, his favorite uncle, always so kind and gentle. No, it can't be true. He would never do something like that. Jake shook his head, struggling against denial. He hides behind a mask, Jake. I thought he had changed, but he never abandoned the cult. He just became more cunning, Clara explained, the pain in her voice evident. Jake felt the anger boiling inside him. I need to expose this. If the radio is right, the town needs to know. You can't do that. They won't stop at anything to silence you, Clara cried. But Jake had already made up his mind. He turned, ignoring the despair in her eyes. If the truth is the only way to free Willow Creek, then I'll do it. I'll use the radio. He knew he needed to act quickly before David and the others could do something. Jake, please, Clara pleaded, but Jake was no longer listening. He ran to the office where the mysterious radio was stored. The voice that had guided him so many times now seemed like a call to action. He turned on the device and adjusted the dials, feeling the energy vibrate in the air. People of Willow Creek, I have something to say, Jake began, his voice echoing through the radio, clear and defiant. The cult that haunts our town is not a myth. The leader is among us, and he's none other than David Thompson, my uncle. He's been manipulating our community for far too long. Jake's words reverberated through the air, and he felt a wave of adrenaline course through his body. The truth was finally being revealed, and he wouldn't let himself be intimidated. It's time to end the secrets that bind us. As his voice echoed, he could feel the cult's presence stirring around him. But now, it was too late. Willow Creek was about to awaken to the truth, and Jake was determined to free his town from the chains of the past, no matter the cost.